Reactive Training Systems.
All right. Welcome back to the RTS podcast. I'm Coach Mike, and today we're talking with Coach Gaby and Coach Peter. All three of us, and Coach Mel, who's not here today, we're all freshly back from Sheffield, fairly freshly back from Sheffield. And, after an event like that, a competition like that, it kind of justifies, I think, a little bit of time for reflection and just some kind of introspection a little bit. A lot happened and a lot of decisions get made, and it's worth, kind of pausing and thinking for a few minutes on, what do we take away from this? So I know I've been kind of doing that a lot, and I'm sure, Peter, you have too. I guess maybe to start off our conversation here, probably a good place to start is just kind of broad thoughts on the competition itself. And for you and me both, it was our first time actually being there. So, yeah, I mean, a lot has been said about the overall kind of competition that it is and what the event is like. But what is it like from your perspective?
From my perspective, I was sitting in the viewers area, so I was sitting right next to a speaker. It felt like I was basically in the middle of everything. I could feel the vibrations. It was loud, and I was sitting pretty close to the stage, so I had a pretty good view. All in all, it was just really amazing to watch. The year before, I was sitting higher on the last floor, and I also had a pretty good view, but it was really nice to this time sit a bit closer, be in the middle of everything, and also get to see, since I was sitting on another side this time, I was getting to see also the coaches' reactions and also getting to see how the lifters were standing backstage before approaching the platform. So seeing that was really interesting.
The better seat.
Definitely sitting closer to the stage, sitting on the right side, because on the left side is where the athletes are coming out.
Yeah, yeah. I would love to see one from an audience perspective at some point. I will happily be backstage coaching as often as I can, but at some point, I'm going to see one from the front. Peter, you and I both arrived, several days prior. So, how do you, how does the Sheffield experience compare to something like the Asian Championships or Worlds even?
And I suppose the main thing is just, of course, being a 1 day competition. It's kind of a different kind of, I suppose, kind of vibe during the week as well, because everything's kind of building up towards this kind of 1 day. And of course, there's a lot of, for the athletes, doing all the media stuff, so on and so forth as well. So they're kept kind of busy. But there's definitely, usually if we're at Worlds or Asians, there's kind of something every day. So you're kind of, I suppose, you don't have too much time in a way to kind of focus on any particular session because you've got a whole range of stuff. So that was kind of interesting, where just that overall build towards one kind of big day as opposed to kind of lots of big days kind of strung back to back as well. So that was kind of
Sure.
an interesting kind of perspective through. And of course, kind of just seeing what's happening with and just of course managing your lifter through all that kind of media stuff is probably something that's another kind of wrinkle on top of a normal competition as well, because I suppose the external demands on the lifter is more than just, okay, take care of myself for the competition for that one as well. So it's just kind of, navigating those true things. But it was a pretty cool experience, and just kind of, I suppose it's a sign of, the kind of professionalism of the sport in a way, kind of leveling up, to have those things are now kind of factors that need to be taken into account as some of the bigger events.
Yeah, yeah, I would definitely agree with that. It's interesting how things at the top level of the sport have changed and evolved over the years. And yeah, it was from a coaching perspective, I agree. I felt like it was more of a relaxed vibe than what you would get at, a different major international competition. And usually that's due to the fact that you're just not managing that many people. It's just comparatively fewer people. So there are fewer sessions, and obviously it's just one session to coach at Sheffield. But, you know, usually by the end of, Worlds, for example, pretty tanked. There's a lot of people, a lot of sessions, and even if you're not coaching in every session, lots of times you're there watching and helping out where you can. Peter, I know you've got a big history of, kind of jumping in and helping lifters that just whenever they need it. And that does kind of have an energy cost by the end of the week. So it was neat to see, like, what could you do at a competition if it was, within every parameter that you can think of, kind of optimized to maximize lifter performance. So like the pace was a bit slower, everything was kind of constructed just so that lifters perform well. And yeah, it was definitely interesting to see. It was fun. It's a hell of an experience. But obviously our lifter was Kasemsand Senumong from Thailand. We call him Opor. And training leading up to this competition was really good. And, you know, obviously he's coming off of winning the World Championships last summer in a very tight competition for the 66 kilo World Championship. But then as we're getting closer to Sheffield, obviously Kjell Backlund is cutting down to 66. And, there was a tremendous amount of hype and expectation around that. Lots of people kind of expected Kjell to walk away with the whole thing. And I guess he kind of did. Like, he was just definitely on a different level. But I know, like, in the run up to this competition, Kjell was untested at 66. There was a lot of not knowing what we were going to get, Yeah, so it definitely made things interesting, as we are approaching this competition, things are going really well. And, having Kjell be a bit untested in that weight class, we thought, hey, maybe we can do something. Maybe something happens here. But as luck kind of has it, things shifted a bit and kind of went a little different direction. And I mean, you do what you can, right? Like in any competition, you take what's there. And, I don't want to frame it like it's a negative or anything either. Like Opor managed to put up a PR performance. So it was not a bad day by any stretch. It's just I mean, at least speaking for myself, came into this with some kind of big dreams. And, it's just a good reminder that you control what you can control. You lift your weights and that's what you get.
But talking about the attempt strategy, he definitely put on a total that was his PR. So he's totaled 7.5 kilos more than at Worlds. And you had a different attempts strategy. So basically, the main difference was that the attempts were selected more aggressively, or how would you say, like, what was the main thing you guys changed compared to the previous competitions approaching Sheffield?
I would say that our attempt selection strategy was intended to be fairly similar, and apparent increase in aggression is only a reflection of the increased potential that we expect. Opor is really strong, and the weights that he can move at 66, like, it's like, it feels kind of silly to say because lots of coaches and athletes say stuff like this and talk like this, but like, you watch the guys training, see it from up close, and there's so much there. There's so much potential there, and it's right there too. And in the past, he's had some bad luck with things that really are legitimately bad luck, food poisoning prior to competitions and stuff like that. Fortunately, we didn't deal with any of that this time, but, honestly, I think in our debriefing after this competition, we're going to make some tweaks and changes to the way that we're tapering down for these competitions. Oprah and I have only been working together for, like, it's not quite 2 years now, I think. So he was self-coached for a long time before that. So he's got a tremendous understanding of, like, his own capabilities and what he responds well to and stuff like that. He brings a lot of that to bear as we work together, but, it's not like long histories here or anything. 2 years is not a small amount of time, but, when you've been working with athletes for 4, 5, 6+ years, it is still a bit different. So there's still some things left to dial in. Tapering strategy would be one. so we can still kind of maximize some more of his performance. But yeah, I guess getting back to your original question is like that increase in aggressiveness was because we expect him to be able to move those kinds of weights. And Peter, I think you guys did an excellent job of adjusting to the day's capabilities, and you've got to try for some of those weights. And sometimes, we speak about attempts in terms of probabilities, like this is a high probability attempt versus a low probability attempt. I think you've got to try, you got to take some risk there. And sometimes it's a bit too much and sometimes not. So I don't truly second guess any of the weight calls that were made. It would have been nice to hit them, but I think, if you've got to point to an issue, it would have been, I think coming back to the taper that he and I put into place, I think we can fix some of that stuff and just come in with a lot more potential.
What was the learning experience you did during the taper? Was there anything you did different this time, or that you noticed, okay, we've done this a few times and it turns out like there's maybe something we can change to make it to optimize it in the future?
Yeah, this has definitely been a learning experience on my end. So, like, I talk about emerging strategies and things like that, and the kind of doctrinal approach to tapering is the no taper approach. We find out what your time to peak is, we put the peak performance on the competition day and just kind of work backwards. So you essentially train normally up through the competition, and the only change that you really make is 2 or 3 days out you stop training so that you rest and dissipate any of that short-term fatigue, but the last block itself is fundamentally unchanged. And I know that's unorthodox, but that's the doctrinal approach. And we did some of that in the beginning, but we've kind of gotten away from it in the last, I'm not sure how many competitions now, but we've gotten away from it and implemented more, for Opor specifically, we've implemented more of a traditional taper. And you definitely see that. Some people seem to do better with that kind of traditional tapering approach. And it seems like it would make sense, right? You reduce the volume, reduce the fatigue, you keep the intensity, and all the traditional taper logic. But we're finding that we're showing up on the competition day a little bit flat. Things are just not as crisp as they are in training. So, I mean, we could fiddle with it and try to get that traditional taper to work right, or we could kind of go back to basics and something that's a little bit more of a sure shot and let it evolve on its own. So I think, obviously the latter is probably the direction that we're headed, contingent, of course, on things change as you go through a training block.
Did you already notice how weights were moving, that they were maybe not moving as expected during the warm-up, and was there any changes you applied in terms of like changing the open up?
I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary on any warm-ups. Peter, did you see anything on warm-ups that influenced
The
your
warm-ups
decision?
were moving as expected, and he was in, like, let's just say, body language, and also just kind of, a lot of the time with lifter as well, just how you can kind of tell from their body language, and just kind of, especially when you've handled a lifter kind of multiple times, we'll say, you kind of get an idea when a guy is on, or what, so on and so forth as well through the warm-ups. So it's, of course, how things are moving physically in terms of the speed, how comfort of the lift, etc. But also, just, I think that's an important thing to keep an eye on too, is does he look like he's kind of in that zone or in that kind of sweet spot? And of course, everyone's a little bit different, and some people are more, they kind of focused in and they're kind of like a laser. Some people are a bit more kind of jovial when they're going through warm-ups as well. But he seemed to be in a pretty good spot. Like, nothing would have said that, okay, we might need to adjust things. So, of course, if we had thought that, then we probably would have adjusted something. So it was a case of, like, warm-ups was looking on pretty cool. And so, yeah, it was kind of systems go at that point as well. And, the warm-ups were pretty clean, tidy. So it was kind of, let's say, I still think the openers were appropriate we'll say. Just mainly like with the deadlift, of course, just the grip, on this one, which is kind of just one of these little things that, and it kind of has kind of happened before, but again, it's not a weight issue on that as well.
Yeah, I don't have his meat card sitting in front of me, so I was going to just pop that open real quick. But I don't want it to sound like, we had some sort of a terrible outing or anything. Really, the differences that you're talking about are just a handful of kilos on a third attempt, usually. So it's not, it was definitely not, bad. The framing for a lot of this stuff is really important because, not just in this competition, but lots of lifters will look at training numbers as they approach a competition. They can look at training numbers and kind of map out this perfect day. If I, squat my perfect squat, bench my perfect bench, deadlift my perfect deadlift, then I'm going to total this huge number. It's going to be like a 40 kilo PR. Well, the reality is that usually isn't how it goes, that things need to be adjusted on the day, and a handful of kilos here and there can make an impact. And, it matters to the overall bottom line of that competition. It's not that it's bad. It's just that this gap between whatever high expectations that you have and then the reality of your performance a lot of times gets felt as disappointment, but should it? It's just the expectations are the issue in my view, that we have to make sure that whatever we're expecting is realistic. And I think the attempts that were called and everything were appropriate numbers and, had one or two things gone, a little bit differently. It's a much different conversation. And again, like to have what is like an off day, and anytime we're talking about like a 5 for 9 performance or something like that, it's definitely an off day, right? But to still walk away with a PR total was significant, and kind of belies the underlying potential. Yeah, so I've pulled it up here, just to kind of step through the day a little bit, as you were saying, Peter, like during the squat warm-ups, everything is going normal, and we open at 247 and a half. And to my eyes, unfortunately watching from the live stream down in the basement, to my eye, the 247 and a half looked normal, maybe slightly slower than what you might expect from an opener. So all the warm-ups and everything seemed normal. And, at that point, usually what I'm thinking for a second attempt is you want to, open a bridge to your third attempt. You want to put something appropriate on the bar. You're not trying to take your third attempt as a second, but you also don't want to get conservative too early. So you called 260 for the second attempt. Again, I agree completely. That totally makes sense, kind of given the context of the situation. Is that kind of what your read of things was at that point, Peter?
Yeah, so the opener was solid, but wasn't blistering to be, getting too aggressive with that as well. So again, the 260 is a good number, and again, a PR squat. So let's just say you're on a pretty good trajectory there as well. And, let's just say with the numbers that we've kind of been looking at, if everything was going very nicely and for third attempts, kind of set us up into the range for those guys without kind of being too aggressive, which is kind of, I think, the kind of placing through. Because I think, what was the top end again, just off the top of my mind for the second attempt, the kind of, let's just say the high range number?
The high range number for the second attempt would have been 262. So we weren't really prepared to go
we're just
beyond
slightly
that for a
paired.
second attempt. Yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I would be hard pressed to predict any of this from anything other than the opener, right? Like, and trust me, I've nerded out on this as much as anybody, and thought about like, well, what if we bring my velocity unit to the warm up room and, start tracking stuff like that? Maybe there's some way for that to lend some extra information, but nothing is going to tell me as much as that opener is going to tell me. And if I'm paying attention to the opener, then that's kind of all I need to know at that point. And I mean, I don't know about you, but like after the opener is in the books, I'm not really thinking about how the warm-ups went anymore.
Oh no, it's the one that just happened is the most relevant always.
Yeah.
Let's just say that's building through, but let's just say I would think it would be a mistake if an opener didn't look great to then make a call based on, well, the warm-ups were looking great, so he should still be good for this kind of thing. It's like
Sure.
that thing that just happened, let's say, comes back to, you want that higher end second attempt, well, earn it on the opener. You can't just
Yeah.
want it, you got to earn it. And if you crush that opener, then by all means, let's just say, because I don't know, usually I kind of find when you're there and you see the opener come in, like in that moment, it's almost like the next number kind of pops in your head and you have that kind of feel for, oh, we're going to go here. And that's kind of what I find a lot of the times, that when you see that, you have that kind of interpretation of, okay, 60 or 50. I kind of usually, your range that you have in there. And it's something, it's almost like it comes to you a wee bit, and you're just, and of course then you have conversation, you kind of get a little bit more information before you settle in. But I've kind of over time learned to trust that instinct quite a bit as well, because it does tend to kind of come pretty much where I'd like it to be when you look back in hindsight and be like looking back and kind of I suppose dissecting the call you made and kind of afterwards and kind of doing that little bit of debrief.
Well, I think it's important to point out too, Peter, like you do a ton of in-person coaching in competitions and stuff like that. It's a skill that you put a lot of effort into developing, kind of building up that eye so that when you watch somebody's opener, you do get a pretty clear sense of an intuition that can be relied on. So that's a skill that's really important for for this kind of job, right? Well, yeah, I mean, and at that point, we talk about taking 260 for the second, and then the second. Well, why don't you kind of take us through what you saw?
The second was work. So, it was definitely kind of at the very most, we're putting 5 on this. Like, let's just say the higher numbers, let's just say was not the number in for that day. So that, like, let's just say your choice there is going to be the 2.5. So taking the small jump, or, coming in and taking just the 5 kilo, which, in hindsight, because it was a close battle in. So I think the 65 was kind of that good possible chance of it. Maybe not as, of course, not as high a percentage as a 2.5, but having Opor was actually quite confident in 65 when he came off as well. Like he was like, so he was fairly dialed in on that. We're kind of leaning in towards it now in hindsight. 62.5, likely would have been, but again, you can't really say that now as well. But yeah, those were the two, I suppose, the only kind of options on the table come that point as well.
Yeah. And I mean, that's how it goes sometimes. Like the second is supposed to be a bit of work, right? Like it's supposed to rev the engines a bit so you can kind of get a good idea of where that top end was. It was a little bit more than we would normally expect. So at that point, whatever the planned jumps are kind of go out the window and you put on what you think you've got left. And, I think, going to 265 was a very defensible call. And, sometimes those kind of forward-leaning decisions work out and sometimes they don't. Calling them more accurately is something that we always strive to do. That's how it goes sometimes. At least I would say, it's not missing a ton on his total, his capability for the day. It's still like pretty reflective, you know, what kind of potential there was. But then, moving on to the bench, something I didn't mention so far that was definitely relevant for him is how cold he was. You know, that was kind of a challenge throughout the week, keeping weight on, which is just kind of an interesting thing about how cold weather affects him. Makes it more of a challenge to keep weight on, which was, you know, I don't know how much it was a factor in performance, but it was definitely something to pay attention to as we prepped for the competition itself. And then like during the competition, trying to make sure that he keeps his coat on. And he's like wearing gloves between warm-ups because he was just physically cold, you know. So stuff like that is stuff that matters to lifters, especially from a performance standpoint, but it's not something that you always think about, you know.
Yeah, and for a little bit of perspective, like recently they had a cold snap here in Thailand because it was like 28 degrees or something Celsius. So that was a cold snap where everyone's talking about how cold it is. So, when you're in the UK then in January, it's quite a shift in environment.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a big change, but yeah, I mean, I don't mean to suggest like that that had distinct performance impact, but it's just like an interesting wrinkle to it. But yeah, as we're warming up for bench, I would say the warm ups for the bench were more or less the same in terms of things are happening as expected. We're feeling pretty good about how the day is unfolding. Yeah, and then we opened at 147, and how I guess take me through that one, Peter.
Opener moved good, and again he came off. You could see, he looked happy. He was like, feeling it on that. So opener was pretty happy with that. Actually, moved in quite well. So we were kind of proceeding on plan A essentially. Then in for the second attempt, again one of the nicest kind of openers that he's like from his historical on the bench, and it was a little bit heavier than what he'd opened it previously. So we're kind of trajectorying pretty well at that point.
Yeah. And then we went up to 155, which tied a PR bench and made that one as well.
Yeah, and that one was a bit of work in that. So again, we're saying, okay, if we can chip on just a 2.5 here on this one, then that'll put us PR bench. And let's just say at that point, of course, he'd have a PR squat and a PR bench under the belt, which let's just say is I think for any lifter, not a bad kind of place to be kind of operating at.
And kind of a situational context here as well. Like at this point, lots of people are missing lots of lifts, especially third attempts and things like that. It was kind of plain to see the pattern that was going on kind of throughout the whole competition. Um, did that affect any of your decision making at all? Like, hey, things in general seems like everybody's leaning a little bit aggressive, so maybe we should pull the throttle back a little bit. Does that factor in for you?
Well, it's more, let's just say, regardless of, let's say at that point, you're trying to maximize your subtotal, especially for, a lifter who is a big deadlifter. So it's kind of like you're taking note of that and you're looking for those kind of opportunities that may be presenting. But I wouldn't say that directly is going to make you throttle back in the sense that, let's just say, our strategy is still to try and maximize as much as we possibly can that subtotal. So let's just say that we're already kind of on that vein and we're kind of looking to do that, we'll say. But it's more just that you're kind of trying to highlight opportunities that may be presenting that'll kind of factor in with that. So it's kind of, let's just say we're already trying to kind of achieve that goal in, and we're just gonna, because we're trajectorying quite well in the prognosis all through into that point as well. So you're kind of keeping an eye just on how that's kind of shaping through. It's almost like you're, I suppose, trying to almost kind of get the lay for where that deadlift battle is going to sit and where things are going to be stacked up towards that. Of course, you're also trying to take into account, are the other guys, even if they're missing, is it unexpected misses? Is it stuff that's kind of in or out of their normal range, just to try and get a feel for, let's say, who's cooking on today or who's maybe as expected or who's kind of struggling a little bit. And again, it's mostly just trying to give yourself information for when things do come down to the kind of the joust with the deadlift.
So, and I mean, like going up to is like the only, like it's the highest probability jump that you can make at that point. You've already made 155, and attempting 157 is just, I mean, it's the obvious choice.
Yeah, and I just think that 160 just wasn't there on the day. So it was a case of like, that's our option here. It's like, let's try and get that guy on the board. We've got it on the PR level as well. Just thought that, 60 wouldn't have been there. So it was just the only choice you make at that point.
Yeah.
Talking about taking small low jumps and potentially also using that to make adjustments in training in the future. When it comes to Sheffield, like we know that every attempt matters, right? So sometimes we get put in a position where we have to take 2.5 kilo of a jump because, let's say, the lifter, like for example, Opor in that case, was pretty close to his top end. So we know, okay, 2.5 is the only option we have. In that case, we kind of need to be confident also in the ability that Opor isn't completely gassed out and can do this 2.5 kilo jump. So talking about small low jumps, I think, Mike, we recently also had a discussion about talking about Sheffield, like that a lifter wants to make the smallest amount of jumps without gassing themselves out, since every attempt matters, right? How important is this to take this into consideration in the future training, like working on work capacity, for example, so we know a lifter can take smaller jumps, maybe even potentially coming up with a different strategy in the future, so taking smaller load jumps than, for example, at Worlds? Or is that not that important and we just want to focus on, okay, this is going to be the outcome, the third attempt, and we want to build on that and take even, let's say, like similar load jumps than what the lifter is actually used to?
I would be interested in hearing both of you guys talk about your experiences here as well. I don't think I've had anybody where I've felt like, we're just not in shape enough to take 3 quality attempts. And I tend to think of, like, some people need to take smaller jumps, and I tend to think of that as a hindrance more than a help. Like on my bench press, for example, I noticed that my bench press will move better if I have smaller jumps, and it leads to me warming up heavier. It leads to me opening heavier. But then if you do find yourself having an off day, that's all of a sudden risky territory to be in, just because you have fewer options, and it would be better to me if I could take bigger jumps and still perform just as well, so I suppose it could be a problem, if you go too far the other direction. And I hear people talk about this. Usually heavier weights, heavier weight classes might talk about it with the deadlift. It's only the ability to get like 2 really good deadlift attempts in. So either they open stupid light or maybe they pass the second attempt even. Like that's not a super common strategy. I have seen it before. What about you guys? What's your experience been around this?
Sometimes I guess it could factor in as well, just the logistics of that comp as well. If you have a very short session, something along these lines, it could all of a sudden become a bigger factor, we'll say. Actually, Opor's competition in Malaysia for his last Asians was one of those where it was a 6-person session. So it was like 6 lifters and, just a short break, and it was like lightning. So let's just say those kind of ones, if you're in that situation where it's literally coming super fast, and of course, then that's when the cramping issues came in. So that became something that wasn't ideal in terms of the kind of the time scales as well. So I think I remember in that competition as well, because we had those cramps on the opener, we skipped the second just to give time to calm that down essentially, so he was able to kind of go in there and take in the third. So sometimes, again, it's like one of these variables that can happen in on the day that you're kind of looking at, okay, maybe we do need to adjust the game plan based on, a situation that's kind of emerged in. And again, if you have a super heavyweight lifters in a short flight, then that could be another factor that might kind of play into things as well. And it depends that I suppose with a lifter as well, if you notice that in their training, if they have quite a low capacity, maybe it's something that you got to factor that into the game plan then as well. Of course, you're probably going to be trying to work on that so that it doesn't become a problem on competition day as well. But I guess how well that comes along is going to be a kind of a determiner how you feed into that game plan as well.
I think, Mike, you also spot on when you're talking about heavier weight classes, because with lighter weight classes, it's usually easy also to take smaller jumps, right? With heavyweight classes, I remember at one point you also talked about your own work capacity when it comes to deadlift. I don't think you ever see someone who can deadlift, let's say, 380 to take jumps, or opening with 370, then taking 375 and then 380. That would be wild. But
If it would be,
I don't think I've ever seen that before. So
no.
also at the same time, like, you don't want to play your best cards on the second attempt yet. So overall, I think it really matters to get in really solid third attempts. Also, watching the lifters at Sheffield, since we had a lot of misses, like missed third attempts as well, I think even though those were very consistent lifters overall, you can already kind of predict the risks. Like, what are the chances that they're gonna make the third attempt now if they already gassed themselves out on the second attempt? So overall, I think it's
Sure.
mostly predictable, like what's gonna happen. So just getting 3 solid attempts in, like building momentum, seems to be the best choice overall. And there's only so much you can do when it comes to work capacity. You're gonna be limited if you're in a heavyweight class. And in general, it's probably not really a night and day difference. It's a really good point what you brought up with when you're used to taking small jumps, but you're having a bad day. So it feels like you kind of running yourself into the ground.
Yeah. And speaking of that, you know, in terms of Opor's performance at Sheffield, you know, at the time that we finished the bench, we're 4 for 6. And I am feeling pretty good as we go into the deadlift, because of course you expect that we're going to make all our deadlifts, because why wouldn't you? You know, and if you do, then that's a 7 for 9 day, and that's pretty good. All the deadlift warm-ups moved well, and then we went out and hand slipped on the open, which I got some messages about, which I think some people, at least the ones that felt inclined to message me, felt like it had something to do with Opor using straps in training, and does not seem to be the case. It seems to be that kind of both times that this has happened, it's been a result of a little bit of baby powder on the bar, and just kind of where he's gripping the bar. And yeah, there are things to be worked on and fixed here, but I don't think it has anything to do with him training with straps.
Yeah, I've read those comments as well. I've seen a comment where someone talked about gonna be simple, just remove the straps. I think it's very simple to like just view it from one side, but at the end of the day, grip is not only about the strength and endurance. Grip is also a skill that can be practiced. So if you're talking about applying a different type of technique, that's very valid, and you can still wear straps during backdowns, for example, and practice the skill during the top set.
Hey, if Ronnie Coleman was a powerlifting coach, he might have said, everybody wants to build custom training programs, but nobody's got a process for how to do it on the regular. But we do. You see, most coaches rely on trial and error, and that's fine if that's your jam, but we wanted a coherent process. Way back in 2015, when I had already been coaching for over a decade, I finally had learned enough from enough sources that I was able to put the pieces together into one coherent process. We call it emerging strategies. The bulk of our 16 world record setting powerlifters set those records using an emerging strategies program. We talk about emerging strategies a ton on this podcast and everywhere. If you ever want a single thorough explanation for how to implement the emerging strategies process, well, that's the emerging strategies course. The emerging strategies course includes 8 modules. That's almost 24 hours of video instruction covering everything. We teach fundamental concepts and basics all the way through integrated examples and case studies. You can watch it at your own pace, as fast or as slow as you want. Oh, and you know the RTS community, our private community that offers you just a stupendous amount of value all on its own? Well, if you enroll in the Emerging Strategies course, you get 6 months of that community membership for free. If you have any questions about some concept, you just post it in the network or jump on a live office hour call with one of our RTS coaches, and you get your answer. If you'd like to enroll or just learn more, to include seeing a full lesson list, all you have to do is go to reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on courses in the main menu. You're going to love it. So, Peter, as you're kind of in the backstage area working through this, after the opener, which I didn't even get to see for a different reason, I was kind of working my way back down to the warm-up room and missed it. But after the opener, we opted to repeat 300 and kind of go for it again, which, again, to just to add a little bit of context, prior to this 300, we opened at 300. 300 tied Opor's competition PR. So expecting big things. It slipped. We're not really worried about his strength, right? But the call was to repeat that weight. Did you entertain the idea of going up at all before you put in that attempt?
Well, I think the pressure that would have put him under in on the second attempt would have been, pretty substantial as well. So like in that one, and again, we've had experience of being in that situation in kind of a high pressure one before as well. So of course you kind of think about that for a moment and you kind of assess in the options. But also the way things were shelling out, we'll say, kind of felt like let's get that one in, let's get ourselves established. And I'd prefer to go a little bit bigger on the jump into the next one once we're kind of in a secure position. And especially when you consider that, we're still in a position where we can attack a solid placing, and every placing at Sheffield is worthwhile, of course, in terms of the reward that's attached to it. And we're still within, of course, it's a big jump for the record deadlift, but it's not a stupid jump. Like it's not a kind of a complete YOLO kind of jump as well. So it's like, okay, we can still be in, let's say, a big but not off the table type of jump to put ourselves into a competitive position. And I kind of thought about this scenario beforehand just in case, because of course from Worlds, I think it's good to kind of crunch. Of course, I think sometimes everyone kind of goes through the best case scenario plans, but I think it's also productive to think, okay, what if this was to happen? Something that could be, not what you would like to happen, of course. Just so that, let's just say, when those things happen, you don't have much, you have 1 minute to make that call. So it's like, well, look, we still have range to kind of come in and put ourselves into, and we're still in a reasonable range to actually attacking on the podium as well. Now, of course, assuming other lifters were to miss, but at that point as well, you can still put yourself to pressure the podium type of position without being, let's say, into a huge jump. So yeah, it was kind of, let's get that one in, let's settle him, so that, let's just say he's got that little bit of, kind of momentum coming in off it as well, because it would be a very high pressure situation to go up on that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Look, this is not the competition that you want to flirt with bombing out of. So I think it's a smart call to just repeat it, get it, and then we can move from there. Especially on a lift like the deadlift. Actually, as I'm talking, I'm not sure that there is a lift where I feel like it's advantageous to go up anyway. It's always a risk. The deadlift can afford you a big jump. The other two lifts can be a little finicky. So going up, it presents a risk. So repeating that weight and making sure that you stay on the board is sensible. Some additional context, you mentioned the deadlift world record. Prior to this competition, I'm not sure exactly when the 66 kilo deadlift record was broken. I guess it was
Junior Worlds.
Oh, no, I mean, prior to this competition, it was 307.5 and open with
He
that.
opened with that, and then he went for the 317, and he missed on the first attempt. So
Right.
that meant that at that kind of a range of a jump, then 17.5 to 18 kilos is that record, and that's still not a ridiculous jump. Let's just say,
Sure.
we'd say what, 12 and a half, 15 might be kind of a normal jump. You're not too far outside of that kind of barometer to be going in
Yeah.
after that as well. So we're still kind of in a hunting position at that point, after that, for getting the 300 on the board.
Yeah. And, feeling, call to go up 18 is not, absurd considering the circumstances either. Like it's a little bit bigger than what we had planned. But, instead of jumping first to second, now we're trying to jump kind of first to third-ish. And we're also thinking about placement, podium placements and records for this and that. And the amount of traffic that you're dealing with in a competition like this is pretty insane. We knew at that point that Chell was kind of far out in front. And so we're not really thinking about that so much. But the rest of the podium was very much undecided. I mean, considering especially that we're pulling our third deadlift. I think we were the maybe third or fourth deadlifter in the flight. So there are still most of the third attempts still to go, and pretty much everybody has got a legitimate shot at one of those podium positions based on whether they can hit their third or not, or if they put in a change, or how much they would have to change. There's a lot going on, and trying to manage all that. And, honestly, we make our best guess is what would give us a good chance of finishing up there. Took a jump to 318.5. And yeah, just kind of talk us through that one, Peter.
We're throwing around a few numbers beforehand as well. So it was kind of, again, it was just trying to keep an eye on what could be a number that would apply the most pressure, essentially, to try and kind of lock in. Because it's one of those interesting ones where, even though he's a big deadlifter, being the smaller weight class in the Sheffield type competition, you are playing from the front, like almost certainly against the 83s, 93s, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And if kind of memory serves, it was because Austin and Russell were in a bit of a joust, which was, say, and again, sometimes it's, well, can we put pressure and take advantage of these other lifters who are kind of trying to push each other in for that as well? So, like, that was a number that would have, let's just say, if other lifters had missed and pushed themselves too much, would have kind of put us in a pretty good position in terms of the overall standing. So it was kind of, okay, like, it's kind of, do you play in? Of course, also the 18 would have been the deadlift world record, a little bit more than just the record attempt, we'll say, but that extra 0.5 would have actually put above. And I think it was, if Austin had missed and we got that, we would have been ahead of him. So it was kind of the apply the pressure when you're playing from the front, and then kind of see how things kind of shake down when people are trying to push each other up the field.
Yeah. I know from my perspective, texting you furiously from the base, I'm looking at, I think, 5 other lifters at that point, and trying to predict, what are they going for? Where, how much do they have left? How much have they put on the board already? And also what percent of the world record is all of these things? Trying to interpret it through that layer too. It ended up Russ and Ade missed their third deadlifts. And then Emil Krastev and Gustav hit their third deadlifts, which, we were finished at that point. And I remember looking at the board prior while we're trying to decide what's our attempt going to be. And I'm thinking, somebody out of this 5 is going to make their third attempts. It just seems unreasonable to expect all 5 of them to miss third attempt deadlifts, and that didn't turn out to be the case. So we attempted what we thought we would need, and I honestly haven't gone back to look and see if we had gotten 318.5, where would that have finished things? Because I don't know, it's a little bit of coulda, woulda, shoulda too, right? Because if we had hit that, then that's going to affect all the decisions that come after it too, right? The rest of the field is going to change their attempts as a result of that as well.
Yeah, and we originally, I think it was 316 we had in there, or 16.5. So it was kind of like a little kind of, let's do the math, kind of lay the land, and you kind of have to plant your flag on the hill there somewhere as well. And it kind of, I suppose, because we changed that late as well, it kind of, because Kel was coming out to take his third deadlift, it just gave him a attempt that came a little bit earlier than he expected as well. So you're just trying to play your cards the best way you can at that point, and kind of trying to put yourself in the best position.
Yeah, we're definitely debating between 16.5 and 18.5. And you can pick whatever number that you want at that point. So a bit of back and forth. And I know for me, what eventually kind of nudged me toward the 18.5 number is thinking, first of all, this should be within our wheelhouse. This should be something that we're capable of. Secondly, not all of those other guys are going to miss their third. Somebody's going to hit their third. And those 2 additional kilos, that's how close it is. Those 2 additional kilos will make a difference in placement. So that's kind of how I was thinking about it. And of course, we came out and did miss Did Opor say anything to you immediately afterwards? Like, did he feel surprised, or how was he in that moment as you guys came off the stage?
And he was, I suppose he'd be disappointed, but he's also, he's, Oprah's always kind of a happy guy as well. So in context as well, yeah, he went in and he gave it the shot that was there, and he kind of left it out there on the platform. And I think that whole experience of the competition is going to stand to him quite a bit as well, because it is like, even going out for that first squat when the whole place is kind of vibrating and the noise and this and that, that is a fairly full on big experience as well. So, one thing is that, I think he, he went out there, put up a PB total, left it all out there. That last deadlift wasn't there on the day, but, that'll be fuel for the furnace to come back in. And, I think it's something that actually, if anything, it's going to be something they'll come back. And, I think he probably sees it in that, I'll get vengeance on this, I'll be back, and that'll be in there.
So it ended up being, a bit too much on again, like, to me, there's all the indications that there's that much there and more for him. It's just a matter of, like, we need to piece this together and make sure that it's showing up on competition day. And these things change over time too, so that kind of feed back into some of the tweaks and updates we'll make around tapering strategy and, improvements that, we'll apply to make sure that he's, like, bringing his best on comp. It's pretty wild for a guy to come in and put up a 5 for 9 and still PR his total, by a decent bit, so.
Yeah, and it's a PR total on a world championship winning total as well.
Right, exactly. And yeah, I mean, I kind of felt, I'm sure you can probably tell, just kind of based on this conversation, like, I know that I was initially a bit disappointed, like I wished that we had been closer to what our projections had been. But, like, after I took him out and kind of the reality sinks in on what he managed to do, I think, you know what, there's plenty here to be pleased about. There's plenty to learn from, but there's not really a lot that, warrants disappointment. So you feel how you feel and you process that and move on. But I think that he's got a lot from this that I hope that he feels good about. And then, as we move forward, there's more to come.
So what's next? What is going to be the next goal for this year?
Yeah. So from here, we, get back in the gym, start training up again. He'll be out this way back to Europe in the summer for the World Championship. So that's in Germany this June. So a good amount of time, it's a good amount of time to train and to develop, continue getting stronger. Plenty of time for us to experiment with a couple other things and still run our greatest hits going into what will no doubt be a tight competition. There's no way that you walk into Worlds and just have an easy day. I mean, maybe one or two guys on the planet can do that, but the rest of us have to try hard. Well, thanks, Peter. Thanks, Gaby, for sitting down and reflecting on the Sheffield experience with me. And yeah, a lot to learn from a competition like this. It's an interesting format, but even then, there's a lot that I'll take away from this and apply to, my work with other athletes as well. So yeah, it was definitely good to see you both and spend time with you both in the UK. And thanks everybody else for watching and listening. And we'll see you guys next time. Hey, let me tell you something that I know about you. Your lifting is important to you. It's probably one of your biggest priorities. And for people like us, nothing compares to the feeling that you get when you set a new PR. That feeling of being the best that you've ever been, of doing something that you've never done before. This is what we're all after, and it's also what RTS specializes in. Getting you the absolute best program possible so that you can hit new PRs and reach your goals. We call it radically individualized training, and we're really good at it. Whether we need to account for busy schedules or equipment limitations, or precisely turn the dials and get the details of the program just right, we have the tools and the experience to guide your lifting to the next level. To us, coaching is all about leadership, relationship, and creative problem solving. A coach should be poised to help you make tough decisions about training and competing so that you can continually grow in your development. And of course, a coach should be a first-rate problem solver, especially when it comes to your training, technique, and strategy. Now, all this has to be built off of a really strong, professional coaching relationship that emphasizes trust and respect. Additionally, RTS coaches are not on an island. We have a strong network of professionals to reach out to, so if you find yourself in need of some specific expertise, say in the realm of nutrition or injury management or sports psychology, there's a deep expertise available there too. For more information, go to store.reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on coaching. That's store.reactivetrainingsystems.com, then click on coaching. Hope to see you on the team soon.